for joining us in the AC Report. I'm Christopher Ailes.
And I'm Marking Up.
And today we're going to go over the 5 best presidents and the 5 worst presidents. So I made the list of the 5 best, and then Mark over here made the list of the 5 worst. Let's start with your list first.
Alright, so we're going to start with 5 worst presidents? Okay, cool, awesome. Alright, so number 5 on my list is Jimmy Carter. And here's why. He presided over one of the most pressing issues America's faced, and that was the Iran hostage crisis. A little bit of backstory. The Iran hostage crisis was born out of spite from Iranian revolutionaries who were students. And they were upset that the Shah, who was backed by the United States, they removed him from power, first of all, in the Iranian Revolution. And then they removed him. The United States took him to New York for safe haven. The Iranians were upset about that. They stormed the U.S. embassy. They took over and basically held the hostages for 444 days. And one of the main reasons was they despised Carter. So Carter became a symbol of the hatred, a symbol of hatred for them. So basically, what that ended up doing is, Carter didn't do anything. He didn't do anything at all. And eventually, it was the election of Reagan. The day Reagan was inaugurated, miraculously they let out all the prisoners, and the thing was over. So that's basically my number. That's the reason why he's my number 5.
All right, and that's a perfect segue because my number 5 of the greatest list is actually Ronald Reagan. He's famous for ending the Cold War. He pushed his Strategic Defense Initiative very far to make sure communism pretty much ended as much as he could. Of course, the famous Gorbachev speech where he said, "Tear down that wall." And then Reaganomics, one of the best economic systems we've seen in the modern day. 16 million jobs were created, real jobs too, not welfare jobs. Obama. He dropped the misery index, which is the sum of inflation plus unemployment. So he inherited an inflation index of 19.99%, actually from Carter, and then he dropped that all the way down to 9.72%. He made sure the conservative movement was once again popular and fun to do because unfortunately with President Nixon, it kind of had a bad stain on it. And then with Reagan, I know you don't like Nixon. And then
big stain.
Oh yeah, Reagan, he made being prideful in American values awesome again. Like he made it fun to be America. Like he loved being the greatest nation on earth, and he wanted everyone to know about it too. And then of course with Reagan, he also made sure our military program got a lot more money. So conservatives always differ from libertarians because we believe in government spending for the military, and that's pretty much the main difference. I mean, there's several others, but that's like the big one we always disagree with. And after Carter diminished our military, he made sure to actually spend a lot more money, and that really helped end the Cold War as well. And to make sure the Cold War never got nuclear, he made several nuclear rules, such as the Immediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, and then the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, to make sure nuclear war was never going to happen. Alright, and who's your number 4 on worst presidents?
Okay, so my number 4 is a tie. Rare in these cases, but
I like it.
It's a tie between Franklin Roosevelt and Lyndon Johnson.
Ooh.
So I detest both presidents. I detest Johnson the most. But but as for the tie, I really can't pick which one, so I'm just going to include both of them on this list. So my reasoning behind FDR, although he was responsible for leading us through the Second World War, his domestic policies such as Social Security and his the New Deal, which were great in the 1933 and onward when he first became president and we were going through the Depression. His policies were great at the time, but they were a short-term solution to a long-term problem. Eventually, even though basically it was just a band-aid, because now here we are in the today in 2018, Social Security is being drained massively. Baby boomers, the people who which the Social Security was basically created for, a lot of them were still living. It was back when Social Security was first created. It was believed that most of these baby boomers would have died off by now, and they're still alive. So what you have is they're running out of money. Not to mention, it is well known that over many presidents since then have dipped into the Social Security fund to fund projects or fund big businesses or whatever it is that they want to do. So he was great when it came to World War II. That really saved him. Other than that, his domestic policies, I honestly think it was just the fact that they weren't long term. They were, in the short term they were great, but the long term they had disastrous effects. Johnson, who I detest a lot, was just, if you look at Johnson's profile, Lyndon Johnson's profile, he was rude, he was mean, he always tried to be the most intimidating person in the room. He would always stand over you when you talked to him. He would sit there and yell at you. He would sit there and raise his voice. And interesting note, I found this very interesting, Chris. I looked it up. There was an article, an opinion piece written and posted on MSNBC's website, as well as on the Huffington Post. And it mentioned that even though Johnson, because of Johnson's new Great Society plan, he was a hero to the Civil Rights Movement. He was also the most racist member of the Civil Rights Movement, which is a surprisingly, a big oxymoron there. But because he was quoted as, from numerous people who knew him, he was quoted as saying the N-word multiple times. And one quote that's actually attributed to him, and it's a very interesting quote, is, "I'll have those, you know what, voting Democrat for the next 200 years. He was quoted as saying this after the Great Society, in which when he was signing it, he proclaimed the famous "We shall overcome," quoting Martin Luther King and others. So another terrible thing he also did was the Gulf of Tonkin. There's a lot of people who right now sit there and say that, I'll bring up Trump real quick. There's a lot of people who, including myself, who don't think Trump has the authority to take military action in other countries without consulting Congress. Technically, you have Johnson to thank for that, because Johnson's the Gulf of Tonkin resolution basically was the precursor to the War Powers Act of I believe it was 76, 70. So it was under Nixon. So, but the Gulf of Tonkin resolution basically allowed the president to take military action, and basically was the precursor for us joining the Vietnam War. So that's my top four.
That's a tough one to match, because they're both racist. Because Democrats, that's what they used to do. So, but also the thing with FDR, what really bothered me about him was there's a book called FDR's Falling, and it's where economists actually prove that his New Deal actually made the Great Depression 8 years longer than it should have been. So that's really
you can also look at the whole concept of the housing. Because back under FDR, you have the creation of the suburbs and all that stuff as well, and it was all part of one of his plans. And it is it's well known that it was, when that process was implemented, it was extremely racist. Those were the undertones for it.
Yeah.
So give us your number four.
All right, number four. All right, this is going to actually make some Democrats happy. It's actually Truman. While I can't stand FDR, Truman was phenomenal. I mean, the Truman Doctrine, it eliminated communist threat in Greece and Turkey, which is amazing. And considering FDR's policies, I have no idea how they ever got along. Of course, the famous Marshall Plan. I mean, in 2 decades, Western Europe saw unbelievable economic growth. And at one point, West Germany, because of this plan, West Germany had the 3rd largest economy in the world, and their economy didn't start shrinking until they adopted, the socialist programs. The Berlin Airlift, amazing foreign policy. I mean, Truman is foreign policy 101. This dude was phenomenal. I mean, he recognized the state of Israel, by the way, which is huge. It blows my mind that this guy ran as a Democrat. I mean, he ended segregation in the U.S. Armed Forces, and we just talked about how FDR was a racist. This guy actually ended segregation. And then, of course, the toughest decision ever, the atomic bomb. It saved hundreds of thousands of lives, and it's still today the most debated topic, but I think it's one of the best decisions he ever made.
Oh, I agree with you 100%. And you have to look at, going back to his decision to drop the bombs, you have to look at, originally, before they came up with the idea to drop the bomb, there was a plan that was called for Operation X, which was basically the invasion of mainland Japan, which if that had gone through, we would still be facing the effects of it today.
Yep.
They were calculating the amount of American deaths, and that probably would have passed the Russians in total war deaths in terms of military figures.
Yep.
But, so, I mean, he made the right decision. I mean, as horrific as it was, because it ushered in the nuclear age, as horrific as it was unfortunately in war. Sometimes you have to make really you have to make just difficult decisions, and unfortunately thankfully he made the decision that caused the least amount of deaths.
Yeah, and also he made sure they were warned that this was coming. Like it wasn't a surprise attack. He wanted the least amount of actual citizens, because in war citizens die, but he warned them with pamphlets and all that.
That's interesting because I've never heard of that.
Yeah, we spread out pamphlets to their citizens and let them know.
Okay, wow. See,
I mean,
you learn something new here on the AC Report every day. Even me.
All right.
Real quick, I do want to bring up one more thing about Truman. You mentioned about his foreign policy. His foreign policy was I will commend him on that. But one of the issues that I think him and Roosevelt was disagreed with was the managing of, we'll say, the big red star in the room here, Stalin and the Soviet Union. Roosevelt and Winston Churchill both realized that even though Stalin was evil because of his beliefs and they disagreed with it, he was a very valuable ally and he was needed to win the war, which is true. Because of Truman, and after Roosevelt's death, he decided to, Truman was able to sit down and convince Russia to start having their soldiers fight Japan and open up a front against Japan.
Yeah.
However, it is well documented and well known that Truman vocally opposed Stalin to the point where he didn't even want to work with Stalin. And regardless of whether you like him, whether you personally agree with the man, with anyone or not, sometimes in cases where there's a world war, you have to work with the enemy. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. You have to think of the bigger picture here. So I will say that his attitude towards that was a bit off, in my opinion. But other than that, I will grant he did do really good with his foreign policy.
No, definitely.
Surprisingly.
Yeah. That's pretty much it on Truman. Who is your number 3 for worst president?
Okay. Number 3. Andrew Johnson, the successor to Abraham Lincoln. So there's 2 major reasons why. Johnson was a bona fide racist at its core. He despised African Americans at the heart. He hated them. He believed that they were worthless.
Yeah.
And so much so that when Lincoln was assassinated, all the plans for a peaceful reunification of the country went out the window. Johnson, even though he hated blacks, he was racist, he also really despised the South. So he completely botched the Reconstruction policies that Lincoln wanted to be implemented.
Mm-hmm.
He completely destroyed all that stuff. One of the things he is responsible for is he didn't. I believe the Jim Crow laws. Those have been around. Those were implemented after the Civil War, were they not? I believe they were.
I believe so. Yeah.
So, if that being true, then you have Andrew Johnson. Why didn't he stop them? What did he do? What did he do to stop those laws? Absolutely nothing. So, because of him, you have a lot of people would argue that the South today is, in some parts of the South, such as Mississippi and other states, are backwards and underdeveloped and really backward redneckish and all that. You would have to blame Johnson for that because because of the way he handled Reconstruction and just completely destroyed it, it completely ruined the South.
True.
So, give us your number 3 best president.
This one, no one knows of this guy, and it really bothers me. Calvin Coolidge. This dude's awesome. He knows the Constitution. I love this guy. So, I'll give you some facts about Calvin Coolidge. The national debt that he had was at $22.3 billion before he was a president. He lowered it to $16.9 billion. This dude was a true conservative, almost a libertarian before the time of libertarians. This dude was awesome. By 1927 in his presidency, because of his tax cuts, 98% of the entire population of the United States paid 0 income taxes. This guy's awesome.
I wish I could pay 0 income taxes now.
Yeah. Well, we need true conservatives like him. Also,
Get rid of the income tax.
Yeah,
That'd be nice.
Also, numerous nuanced taxes, such as like with cars and theater tickets, were eliminated with this guy. He reduced the federal budget from 5.1 billion to 3.3 billion, so he was just cutting waste, saving us money. And my favorite part, he vetoed 50 bills. He knew what the government's limits were and made sure we didn't do anything, that we should do. He made sure, no healthcare was under the government. He made sure we weren't spending way too much money on certain like military programs or anything like that. I mean, he understood American dreams and what we stand for.
Now, I'm surprised that he's, I want to say banished to the realms of obscurity because so many people don't know about him.
Yeah,
I mean, it amazes me.
I think it bothers people because he's Ronald Reagan without being an actor, honestly. He's a lot like that, and also he didn't have a Cold War to deal with or anything like that.
Well, he didn't have a truly historical world stage moment that made him famous. I mean, look at all the greats. Lincoln, Kennedy, Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt.
Yep.
They all had stuff like that.
No, definitely, and I mean that's a big reason why Calvin Coolidge isn't known. Also, I would argue, public education is controlled by a certain side, and they don't want Calvin Coolidge to be recognized because of what he did. Like he had a booming economy with cutting down government programs. So
I mean, I never learned about him when I was in history class in elementary school, middle school, high school for that matter.
Yeah, sure. And then we're going to continue on with our list of top 5 best and top 5 worst presidents. We start with number 2 worst president. Over to you, Mark.
All right, so number 2, he's mean. He was mean. He was always looking to brawl with people. He's also on your $20 bills. Of course, I'm talking about Andrew Jackson. So there's a couple of things I could say about Jackson that make him really, really bad. But the number one thing that comes to mind is the Trail of Tears. Now, there are some people who would argue that Jackson was great. If you look at it, a few positives. He was Florida's first territorial governor. He also was a national hero during the War of 1812 at the Battle of New Orleans.
Yep.
But when he became president, he completely tarnished his reputation. And a couple of other things about him. In his first annual message to Congress when he got elected, he recommended actually eliminating the Electoral College. He also tried to democratize federal office holding. What else? Let's see, what else did he do? His battle, one of the greatest battles besides Trail of Tears was centered around the Second Bank of the United States, which was a private corporation but also a government-sponsored monopoly. When Jackson appeared hostile toward it, the bank threw its power against him. He is actually credited with getting rid and completely destroying the Second National Bank. But he was basically, go to the Trail of Tears, which I think is the big thing that a lot of people don't like about him. I mean, I can't remember the total number of Native Americans that died on the Trail of Tears, but it was huge. Basically, all these Indians were promised land. They were told to get up, leave their homes, and go settle out west. Mm-hmm. And they would be left alone. There would be treaties that would ensure that they would never be bothered again. We all saw as the future, as it kept getting later and later in the future, we all saw how that ended out. So Andrew Jackson, in my opinion, second worst president in history. Very bombastic, always looking to fight. Even though he was a common man, he believed very much in the common man. He was a notorious drinker. Yep. He would always, this is the guy who would sit there and shoot anyone he disagreed with.
Yeah, very unconstitutional too.
Oh yeah, he completely just tore the Constitution a new one.
Yeah, it's disgusting. I mean, I don't think anyone will ever debate you on that. Hopefully.
I mean, if you want to get a look at his, another thing actually. So there's something going on right now. So there's the issue right now in this country with tariffs. Trump imposed tariffs on imported goods across the world. Mm-hmm. Well, interestingly enough, Jackson met head-on the challenge of John C. Calhoun, who was the leader of forces trying to rid themselves of a high protective tariff. So there were tariffs that were placed on at this time, and John C. Calhoun was leading a group of people who wanted to get rid of the tariffs completely, because they were terrible. When South Carolina undertook options to nullify the tariff, Jackson actually ordered armed forces to Charleston and privately threatened to hang John C. Calhoun. You have a president who is marching troops into his own territory and threatening to hang a public official. Doesn't get because he's trying to do something that the government doesn't want to undo. So you have the ultimate. You want to talk about completely unconstitutional. He's a damn near dictator.
Yeah. No, it's terrible. All right. So my number 2 on the broader side of greatest presidents is Thomas Jefferson. Love this guy. So he, of course, before president, he wrote the Declaration of Independence. He wrote the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom. I mean, he's pretty much the reason why we have a First Amendment. He was a large advocate for states' rights, which a lot of people don't understand why that's so important or why we really started. He was the main, he didn't want us all to be under one state. He wanted, all 50 states to be, well, not at the time we weren't 50, but all individual states to be, their own closest utopia possible, and then you move to which one you prefer to live in. Mm-hmm. He was a big advocate for that. Made the Louisiana Purchase. I mean, that was huge. He launched the Lewis and Clark expedition. He helped create the very idea of our own, pretty much our own republic rather than democracy. He made sure that we were a constitutional republic and not a true democracy because he saw how that would fail. He was very wise in history. He established the U.S. Military Academy. He abolished the slave trade, which is something you actually mentioned in an earlier podcast, was how Thomas Jefferson, a lot of people call him racist who don't know anything about our history. He wanted to abolish slavery in the Constitution, but he at least got to the point where he could abolish the slave trade during his presidency, which is huge. He established the structure of the Library of Congress, which was, once again, he just pretty much donated thousands and thousands of books and helped. He's pretty much the father of the Library of Congress. And he wrote one of the most famous books of all time, which is The Notes on the State of Virginia. And that's where he expressed, constitutional government, checks and balance systems that we have today, individual liberty, and separation of church and state as well, too. So he was all about freedom, liberty, and everything we know and love about America. Thomas Jefferson.
Well, I mean, he espoused everything that the Declaration of Independence stands for.
Mm-hmm.
He firmly believed in the rights of man, the rights of all people.
Yep.
And he, it's that he believed in individual property, and he was probably one of the best founding fathers out of all of them.
My personal favorite.
Okay.
All
right. So we're gonna do a couple of honorable mentions here. So before we get to our number 1 pick my number 1 pick for number 1 of the worst president.
Yeah.
So again, another tie. And there's a lot of debate between the two of us, but so my tie is between Bush and Obama. But I'm going to give the edge to Bush for one main reason. Yes, I disapprove of a lot of what Obama did in office, and I think a lot of what his actions and a lot of stuff he did, with such as the Iran nuclear deal and other stuff, the healthcare debacle and all that. While I think those were bad, it's too soon to accurately and historically judge him because he's only been out of office for 2 years now.
Yeah, it's been a good 2 years.
Okay, yeah. Well, so I'm going to go with Bush on this one. It's been 10 years since he's been out of office, and I'm gonna have Bush as my honorable mention for probably one of the worst presidents. And the main reason behind that is a lot of our civil liberties died during Bush's presidency. You have the creation of the TSA, you have the creation of the Patriot Act, which not too long ago I actually used to be a huge supporter of the Patriot Act until once I got to college and I started researching and realizing, it's a complete violation of civil liberties. It's allowing people to detain you without notice. It allows for people to sit there and spy on you, the average citizen. You also have what issue you also have is the
housing market.
The housing market, which was basically one gigantic bubble, and then that burst in 2008.
Yeah.
Then you also have the Iraq War, which to me was an inexcusable war. There was no need for us to go to war in Iraq. It was a debacle. So those are my honorable mentions for my number one. So now, my number one, worst president of all time in U.S. history. A lot of people don't know this guy, which shocks me. But I mean, study your history. You'll know what I mean. James Buchanan, the president before Lincoln. Here's a man who had the opportunity to prevent one of the most horrendous war we have ever fought, and a war that has the most casualties amongst Americans than any other war in the history of this world, in the history of America. In fact, in his inaugural address, Buchanan called the territorial issue of slavery happily a matter of but little practical importance. He had been tipped off about the Supreme Court's decision in the Dred Scott v. Sanford case, which came shortly after his inauguration. He also supported the theory that states and territories have a right to determine if they were to allow slavery. There were also reports Buchanan may have influenced the court's ruling. Those are unfounded right now. The Dred Scott decision aimed good and solidified Buchanan's Republican opponents. Also note, Buchanan was a Democrat. And it drove a wedge in the Democratic Party. The country also went into an economic recession as the Civil War approached. So let me simplify it this way. Buchanan is the American equivalent of King Louis XVI as France was heading towards the revolution, the French Revolution.
Wow.
He's the worst person to have at the helm. He just did not care. In fact, when his power was done, when he was done being president, and he rode to Lincoln's inauguration, and he's quoted as telling Lincoln, basically on the lines of, if you're as happy about taking this job as I am of leaving it, you're going to do great. So you have a guy who is the worst person to have at the helm as our country is steering towards a disaster that would result in the deaths of 600,000 Americans.
I really like that analogy because both use big government forces to make sure racial inequality happened.
That's true.
Yeah.
I didn't think about that. Yeah.
Big government sucks.
Exactly. So you have, within 3 months after Lincoln's election, keep in mind this was before he was inaugurated. So this was 3 months after his election. Seven states left the Union, and as Buchanan remained a lame duck president until Lincoln could take office in March of 1861. In his State of the Union message to Congress, Buchanan is quoted as saying that as sovereign states, they and they alone are responsible before God and the world for the slavery existing among them. For this, the people of the North are not more responsible and have no fight to interfere than with similar institutions in Russia or Brazil. Buchanan did absolutely nothing. He could not stand. He had every opportunity to try and at least dissolve the situation of the Civil War, but he didn't.
Yeah.
Which is why, in my opinion, he is the worst president of the United States.
I like it. That's a good one. So actually, I'll do my honorable mention first. But my number one guy, you'll see you'll see why he's number one. So my honorable mention right now is, and this is gonna be controversy, but he's the current president right now, President Trump. He's doing phenomenal. I mean, if you see my list, I have Calvin Coolidge, I have Reagan. So Trump, he's doing a phenomenal job. Especially if I know reports right now are, Korea is, secretly hiding nukes and stuff like that. So, but if he can actually denuclearize Korea and have Korean peace, it's gonna be huge. I mean, the economy is phenomenal, and he inherited a horrific situation by one of your honorable mention, worst presidents, Obama. I mean, and if he could do all of that, build the wall, and somehow solve this horrific healthcare program that Obama gave us, dude, he's in the top, at least top 6 somewhere. In my opinion,
I could agree with that. I mean, for the record, I'm not saying I do not like Trump. I mean, I will admit Trump has done a lot more than what I thought he would do when he got into office. But I will withhold my judgment about him being the best, worst, okay, moderate, whatever, until after his service is over.
Yeah, we had 6 more years.
We'll see what happens in 2020. We'll see. Should be interesting. Tune in. But yeah, I agree.
Alright, so that leads me to in my opinion, the number one greatest of all time president, Abraham Lincoln.
Really? Not George Washington?
Not George Washington.
Dude, he's the only president to win by by majority.
I like Washington a lot. He would be an honorable mention. I think Lincoln did more for, I don't know. At the time, I think Lincoln's impact on history was a little bit more, and also, I don't know. Washington favored a little bit too much with Hamilton for my liking. I'm not a big Hamilton guy. Like, I mean, I don't know. He's not my favorite. I'm not a big anti-federalist guy.
No.
Clearly, I'm a federalist guy. But okay, so Abraham Lincoln. I mean, he wasn't a dictator. He made sure of that. I mean, he was a classic Republican. He left war strategy to his generals, which was genius because they knew what they were doing. He wanted to minimize casualties in an all-out war. He never held grudges even after the Civil War. He wanted to help rebuild the South, and he did that with the proclamation of amnesty and Reconstruction that you talked about a little bit. That his, Johnson kind of messed up, and on whether it be on purpose, I think it was on purpose, but he messed up. After freeing the slaves, he knew most of the racist Democrats would be, they would hate it, be very angry, so he made sure in the 14th Amendment, and of course, the 14th Amendment, he made sure it was passed, which is really good. He signed the first of the Homestead Acts, which made sure poor people could obtain land. He did the Morrill Land Grant Act, which created numerous colleges if they targeted if they taught military tactics, engineering, and agriculture. So when colleges would do a lot. Of course, the Emancipation Proclamation is what he's most famous for. That was his historical moment that everyone should know about. And that was the precursor to the 13th Amendment, which made sure, slavery could never happen here again. And then, he established the U.S. banking system. He was not just a great war president, he was a great economic president. And to this day, I think he's the reason why we can really live up to what the Constitution stands for, that we're all created equally. We treat everyone as an American, no matter if you're white, black, brown, whatever. He's the guy. There's a reason why he thanks Thomas Jefferson, why Jefferson's my number 2 also. He thanks Thomas Jefferson for what he did in the Constitution and Declaration of Independence often. So, yeah, I don't think it was too close for me. I love Lincoln, grew up reading about Lincoln and his books, so.
I think there's a split between Lincoln amongst the conservative side of American politics, because you have some who view him as a basically usurper who marched his own troops into his own country to put down what some view as a legal right to secede from the Union. Whether it is legal or not to secede from the Union is something that it can be debated about to the ends of time, and I don't think we'll ever get a clear answer.
Yeah.
But, if you sit there and go with the pros and cons, oh yeah, definitely the pros definitely outweigh what little cons there are.
Yeah, definitely.
For Lincoln.
Alright.
So next week, or the next podcast, we are actually going to reverse the roles now. We thought it'd be cool. At some point, he's going to do the top 5 worst, and I'm going to do my top 5 best.
Yeah.
Which is going to be amazing.
Yes.
There's
You'll truly see how different views we have.
Oh, definitely. Because my number 1 is completely different than his number 1.
Yeah, and here's a hint. I don't like Obama. It's going to be the top 5. So we'll have some fun with that.
So you can probably be much harder to guess who number 1's going to be.
Well, it won't be him. There's worse. Not much, but if people actually did start the KKK underneath the Democrats, there's worse.
Yeah, true.
Alright. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We've been the AC Report.